and welcome back to the ANCW podcast, Calling All Cattlewomen. I'm your host for this episode, Leanna Spratling. With us today, we have a very special guest, our very own Pam Griffin from the state of Arizona, and she is the 2022-2023 American National Cattlewomen's past president. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Leanna.
So I wanted to kind of start with your background. How did you end up in agriculture? It's such a small community, and everyone has a really interesting story of how they've fallen into it.
Well, I grew up with what I would call a hobby farm, and I was the oldest of 5 children. So I was tasked with caring for the sheep, the goats, the lambs, the small amount of cattle, maybe most at the time is 3 or 4, chickens, ducks, and all of those sorts of things. So I was somewhat familiar, and I've always maintained having horses as well. My kids grew up with horses around. So, and then in 2009, I met my husband, John, and he was the operational manager of his family's ranch. He could not leave his ranch. So I was still working at the time. My background is in real estate development, commercial and residential. I was one of the people that would go in with the developer and start to develop and then transition it over once people started buying homes. And just gravitated more towards the ranch. I moved about an hour and a half away. So at that point, I moved up to the ranch and was traveling an hour and a half each way every day until I retired 10 years ago. So to me, and I had a lot of legal background. I started law school in California in Santa Ana, but spending 3 hours on the highway to get to what should take you 45 minutes to get home, going to work, then going to law library at night, it became too much. So I came back to Arizona. As far as the transition, it was more numbers than it was unfamiliarity. John taught me a lot, and so that was really helpful.
That's definitely a very different and unique background. I didn't know all that about you. I knew that you had a job off the ranch before you ended up moving in with your husband. I didn't know it was in real estate, so that's actually a really cool background.
Yeah, and it gave me the opportunity to, I still have a lot of attorneys that are good friends. I've worked with nonprofit attorneys probably a minimum of 5 times a week. So that was really helpful in transitioning. It wasn't uncomfortable to go into a nonprofit as an officer. And I had a lot of resources that I could ask questions of. Once John and I moved up here, I had some money to invest. So we started a separate LLC, which I'm the majority owner of. So it's a woman-owned export cattle company. And that's a considered woman-owned business because my percentage is more.
Okay. So what kind of cattle do you guys raise? What were you thinking of when purchasing these animals, and what did you end up with?
They're Angus cross. We buy balancer bulls from Bob Prosser up in Winslow. And so I did have him pull 13 heifers a few years ago and had them AI'd, and I can never say it right, to the Akaushi cattle. I never say it right. And for beef for family. So we did take 3 of them and finish them off, and we're eating them now. So they're really good. So I would definitely do that again.
Okay. So what was it like going from your background on the homestead where to like diving in head first to a cattle operation that you didn't necessarily grow up on?
The first few years, I was still working, so I was gone a lot of the time. He retired to full-time work at the ranch probably 3 years before I did. Um, it's interesting because we're off grid. So for me, still working when the blow dryer doesn't work at 4 in the morning and I have to go to work, that was something to get used to. But we beefed up the solar system and its generator backup. It's got, I think we have 48 batteries. And so that was helpful to me. That was something that I had to transition to. As far as cooking, we use propane. To me, it's very much the same. It's gas. The phone was a little different because we're 18 miles from any phone lines, water lines, power lines, any kind of lines. So there is a Verizon cell tower on the highest peak out here. So I'm able to get that. And then I had to get 2 satellite dishes, one for TV, and he already had one here, I think, for TV, but I had that switched out so we get more and better reception. And then I had to get one for internet. So we have 2 satellites on the house. That was, for me, probably the biggest transition. And I had the opportunity to grow gardens. So I love gardening. So I do a lot of that. One of our boys, Brandon, he built me some block garden beds because I wanted them raised, because my thought was as I get older, I don't want to be bending down on the ground. And then as John brought in old water troughs that they weren't going to use anymore, I commandeered them, and those are garden beds now too. So other than just the amenities that I was used to out on my place, um, those were the hardest transitions for me. I mean, I already rode horses, so I wasn't uncomfortable with that. Um, and just learning to move cattle, their field of vision and all those sort of things that I learned probably the first year. A lot of rattlesnakes, which I'm not unused to from where grew up, because there were a lot. So it was just transitioning to the quantity. It was a difference to me, I always felt it was the quantity, and then on paper, it's where the decimal point sits. So it wasn't that huge a transition. And because I did budgets for multi-million-dollar companies, to me, it wasn't an uncomfortable thing. Just because it's just a decimal points is what it comes down to.
Okay. I definitely spending time with you, some of your rattlesnake stories have always been the absolute wildest. I'm from where it gets a lot colder. We do have rattlesnakes, but knock on wood, I haven't ran into one yet. And so hearing all your rattlesnake stories are always very interesting to hear. Definitely glad I don't have to deal with that nearly as much. So how did you end up with your foot in the door with Cattlewomen? Because that's quite a transition from moving to a new place and getting in at the local level up to the national level, which is the usual way that things go, but it's different for everyone.
Well, I went to a steak fry with John for our county, Gila County cattle growers. And there were a couple of ladies there that came up to me and said, "Hey, would you consider being an officer for the Gila County Cowbells?" And I said, "I don't know what that is." And next thing you know, I'm in there, and I ended up being in that wonderful group of women, really wonderful ladies, and you learn a lot from them. Um, so I ended up, at the time that I was Gila County president, I ended up being Arizona state president at the same time. And Barbara Jackson and the 2 ladies from Gila County kind of just told me that's what I was going to do. And so I did that, and I really enjoyed it. And it was wonderful going across the state of Arizona. And having lived in Arizona since 1974, you think you have seen most of the state. And I saw some places that I never even knew existed. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful place, and met a lot of really neat people. After that, I was at convention. Um, gosh, I don't know if it was Nashville or San Antonio, but I went to the 2009 convention, I think, or 10, that was in Arizona, and John introduced me to a lot of people there, and I saw some of the ladies I already knew. And then after that, I was at National, and Barbara said, you need to go into this meeting. And I thought, well, what meeting's this? And it was American National Cattlewomen. And in that meeting, here were the group of women. I saw several women there who had been resources for me as I transitioned into X4 Cattle Company. I felt an obligation and a responsibility to give back or participate in something in the beef industry. And a women's organization really, I felt, was important. There's none other like it in the United States. I consider us a fairly elite organization. We've led some pretty impressive courses and programs throughout the years. And so I joined in 2010 at that meeting, been a member since, and just went from there. I'm always been at convention. I think I missed 1 year for an illness, but that's it. So I've been a member going on 15 years, but I just felt that I might have something to add. I think everybody brings something new to the table, and mine was more of the, I would say, the background or the bones of the organization that I could bring, with some of my legal knowledge and some of my business knowledge.
So when you started in ANCW and you were told to go to a meeting of an organization you didn't know of, what was the point? What was that moment when you came to the realization that ANCW was something that you were going to be passionate about, and that it was such, as you say, an elite organization and something that you should be a part of?
Well, I think when I went to the first meeting, seeing some of the people there, some of the ladies there that I had resourced for information, you create friendships, and that's when I became enthusiastic about it. I think that sometimes women play a much different role in the businesses. And I learned a lot from these ladies, and everybody was so kind and giving, and always has been, that was some place that I wanted to be.
So you obviously did a lot of traveling as state president. What was one of your craziest stories, or most memorable stories? Because Arizona is a pretty sparse state. I'm sure you covered a lot of ground and ran into a lot of unforeseen problems. What's one of your best stories from traveling around Arizona?
I think that one of my most memorable in driving was I was down at Douglas, down at the Cowbells, and I stayed with Sue Krentz, because the Cowbells is the original organization. They were established in 1939. So I went down for an event there. I carry when I travel, if I'm in a state that I can carry, and I can carry here. And the interesting thing about, I have two cats fighting underneath me. Sorry.
It's okay. My puppy's chewing on my chair.
So the interesting thing, and I could get into the border issues, but I'm going to leave that one alone, is that the border check is 8 miles in. from the border. So I have a loaded 12 gauge leaning against my passenger seat. And I was talking to the phone on the phone with John, and he says, "Oh, I'll let you go." And I go, "No." I have a loaded weapon right here, and if I'm going to jail, I want you to know. And they could have cared less. So it was more me being frantic about it than anything else. But that was a memorable one. They struggle a lot in Douglas with what goes on there. So I just wanted to be able to protect myself. So that was, I went to a home that was just unbelievable. And that was in Greeley County. In like the bathroom sink, just to see everybody's different homes, and it was all wood and very rustic, and the sink was an old wine barrel, and it was just, I've seen a lot of neat things. And one of the most unfortunate things that I was present for was when we were interviewing, I was a judge for the beef ambassadors, and Lauren with the Beef Council was there. And there were a lot of people in the room that I thought, well, I don't know that they really belong, but I was paying attention to the interviews and the speeches. And all of a sudden, this little bitty gal jumps up, and a bunch of them jump up, and they started protesting and against our industry. But what they didn't realize, they were actually protesting against dairy and didn't realize what we were. And this little bitty gal actually shoved Lauren, which surprised me, but they were videoing it all. And I remember, I don't know if you remember Mackenzie Kimbrough. She was one of the young ladies we were interviewing, and she must have been 17 and close to 18. And all I could think about is getting to the room where the kids were. You know, the kids, I call them kids, and got in there. Unfortunately, there was a father, a parent in there already. And when they were all said and done, we really had nothing to say to them. Although it pertained to our industry somewhat, we did not engage with them. And I remembered Mackenzie looking over to me, and she goes, "Is this part of the test?" And I said, no, it's not. So that was an interesting situation.
So did they just yell and scream and have signs for a few minutes, and after not getting any pushback, they just left?
No, I had a lot of things going through my head, like when you can take off those shoes, take that makeup off, don't drive here, and walk the talk, then I'll listen to you. I mean, those kind of things were going through my head, but I think it was decided that it was better just to not give them any fuel.
Yes, especially
And they
since
left.
they were recording. That's all they were looking for, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and then we saw the next day they went to Chipotle's, and they were claiming victories every place they went. So I don't know. It was not something that I had on my agenda that day.
No, I remember my first national cattlemen's meeting. I was 15 years old, and my mom was the state president, and she didn't want to go to nationals alone, and my dad doesn't leave the ranch, and so I was as the eldest there. She took me, and they were taking us, it was in Arizona, and they were taking us from the convention center over to where we were having like a fiesta party and a Mexican, like Spanish rodeo. And there was this giant line of buses. And as we were coming in on the shuttle from the hotel, there was a bunch of people with a bunch of signs. And I remember chit-chatting with someone else on the bus, saying like, if only they knew that the glue that they use to make the signs and the shoes on their feet and the asphalt that they're standing on, like they're just flat out uninformed and have something in their life that makes them angry. for whatever reason. But we saw them on the corner by the traffic light, and then we got off the bus, and all the staff for the convention like started shoving us around the other side and made us walk around the whole building. And the buses that we saw were decoy buses, and the protesters were laying in front of the buses thinking that they were stopping our event from happening. And they actually had a bunch of spare buses. I don't know how they got all these buses in such a short amount of time, but they had all these other buses around the building where they couldn't see them, and we just drove off as if nothing was nothing was going on.
Yeah, I felt the same way you did, is they, just standing there looking at them, evaluating them, knowing they either drove or rode a bike. It
Mm-hmm.
was 100 and something degrees outside, that they have had no clue what the byproducts were that they were presenting right there.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest arrows in our quiver, so to speak, is how widely beef is used for all these different products that everyone uses. And it's the one thing that doesn't, not the one thing, but I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, because it is one of our our biggest bangers. Is it doesn't matter what your diet is.
No, you use all these things, you chew gum, you play, if you play an instrument, you know, it's all agricultural related jello. It's unfortunate that people don't understand that, a lot of people don't. Very unfortunate.
And it's difficult to remember when we have unfortunate interactions, like in person, like we had, or on the internet, that they just genuinely don't know. It's not a hatred from an understanding, it's a hatred of ignorance. And they're just the type of people that something is going on with them personally, and they feel a need to, they feel like they need to be validated by doing something that they think is very virtuous and very good. And they're just angry and feel like they need to do something worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely. That's the only thing I could figure. They didn't even know their audience. I mean, with us, um, and they thought they had a victory there. And to me, it was very unfortunate because they were very ill-informed.
Yes. And I think that's um, really one of the most important things that we do at ANCW, is that we are very education focused, whether it's with people wanting to get into the industry, with wired women in education, women in ranching education development, or we're talking resources to do stuff like ag in the classrooms at the elementary school level or the high school level. And just because that's part of the issue of like, how do you present this information to all these different audiences in a very effective way. And so I think that's something that ANCW specifically focuses on a lot, that I think is down the road one of the most valuable things we can do.
Yes, and the Wired program is exceptional. I think I've been to two, but to watch other people, um, our 12-year-old great niece attended in Arizona, and it was amazing to watch her learn to give shots, and now properly, without a family member telling her. And there was a veterinarian there that was able to pull back the hide and show her and show the other women whether they did the shot right enough or not, because they injected a colored Gatorade so they could see if they did it right, didn't do it right, and then be able to practice. So now Claire is, I think, pushing 14, and John always says, no, Claire's been trained. She's doing the shots and she loves it. So it's nice to see that. And it was in such a an environment where anybody could ask anything. And that's what's really important. Bunch of ladies. If there's men teaching the class, it's because they're the best of the best. And that's what we want for our ladies attending. It's just a very nice environment for ladies to go to, or young women to go to, and learn and ask their questions and get them answered properly.
Especially in an environment that isn't a high stress situation. You're not worried about the cows like spooking and flipping over. You're not worried about the grumpy uncle screaming at you because he doesn't think that you did it right. It's just a situation where the stakes aren't high, and that's where you can actually soak in what someone's telling you.
And for each area that you learn in the Wired, you have a business professional there that's their area of expertise. And that's nice. I would have never learned how to put the pellets in the ears had I not gone to one of those. And we don't do that here, but it's nice to know. That's how it's done. I'm more visual. I'm a very hands-on. And so for me, that was very beneficial.
Yeah, I remember when I first went to convention when I was 15, that's when people started talking about this new program and everything about that. Like that's when the ball started to get rolling. And so I've seen the progression of it. And now we have like 5 or 6 a year. And we try to have them in each region, and so everyone has an opportunity to go. And now California is doing like a Wired, I'm not sure what they call it, like a Wired 2.0. That's kind of like the next intensity level. And so that's really interesting. I'm going to be excited to see what goes on there. Do you know any of the background of Wired, of how this idea got presented and started formulating? I've never heard the whole story.
It began with a program in Texas, and it went off of that into ANCW. So ANCW took it and did their own tweaks on it, and it progressed a lot from there. I love that there's 5 a year. I love that you don't have to be a member to attend, because that shows non-members what we have available to them. They can talk to the other women and listen about the other programs and what we have to offer for women across the United States.
It's definitely a really good program. I'm excited to see it continue to flourish with everyone's ideas and all the kinks getting taken out of it.
We have some very good leaders in that program, and it's very impressive.
So, as a national president, you also did a ton of traveling across the country, which is definitely a whole nother level than a state that you got to grow up in. What's one of like what's the crazy story when it comes to traveling nationwide?
I was robbed right before I went in for my second interview for ANCW as VP. I was in San Antonio and in the restroom washing my hands, and I had my briefcase with me. And at that time, I carried my iPhone in a case that had a slot for your credit cards and your cash. And the gal just picked that right up out of it. Had my driver's license, it had everything in it, and she just picked it up and walked out. So I walked out and went to call the gal I was meeting, and no phone, no nothing. Couldn't even go back up because I didn't have through TSA because I didn't have my driver's license. So we tracked my phone, and tracked her right to her house. The police, we were watching her. It was kind of crazy. The police were watching her walk back and forth in her house with my stuff. You know, you could see it moving. So they went to her house and it was all there and got it from her. But so then I went directly from there into changing my clothes and into my interview. So that was kind of a crazy situation. I'm thankful I got everything back and it worked out. But as far as traveling, you have, especially since COVID, I think flights are delayed. I sat in Las Vegas once for probably 5 hours because flights got delayed and canceled. When I was flying into, it might have been Georgia or I forget where. And as we were landing, there were tornado warnings and the plane was really turbulent. But other than that, I can only say good things. The ladies that I've met along the way are exceptional women that I enjoy being around all the time. They are so hospitable and kind. And I had a great time every place I went. There wasn't a single place that I didn't enjoy myself and feel welcomed. And there was a lot of flying in 24 or 23 because along with every state that invites you to attend, you have you have conventions. You sit on the NCBA executive committee. So you're flying back and forth to Denver for those meetings or Zooming. So there was a lot of travel. I actually would at one point, I put my suitcase on our big long chest freezer and I would just open it, take things to the laundry, refurbish what I needed to refurbish and pack. And in a couple of days, I was back on a plane. But it is an experience like no other. I will never forget it. And I would highly recommend anybody that's interested in going up the chain to get a hold of one of the officers and we'll help you along the way. It's just an experience that you will never forget.
So, what officer positions did you hold at ANCW before going into vice president, which vice president goes into president elect and then president? So, what else were you holding?
Region director. And I sat on a committee for Penny Zimmerman. I think it was a subcommittee. It might have been Ways and Means subcommittee, but just region director before I had applied in that subcommittee of the Ways and Means.
Okay. For everyone who doesn't know and may be interested in going up the chain, like you said, what are the requirements when it comes to holding a position on the executive board? If you know them.
It needs to be like a region director, a chair of a standing committee. There are 2 positions open right now, and it'll be advertised soon for board member at large. And those are positions that could be applied for that would help you to qualify. Like I said, there's several different ways. And if somebody is interested in becoming an officer, becoming part of the team, becoming a committee chair, they can just reach out to any of us that have been past presidents or that are past presidents or any officer, and we can get you on that right path and answer your questions and go forward. It's well worth it. It really is. If you want to help it go down the path, and I would love to see younger people being more involved because, you know, we talk about transitions and we need a transition period and we need to start transitioning over to some younger ladies. Not that people my age aren't fully capable, but I'm not as technically inclined. I don't have the thoughts and the things that some of the younger people are exposed to that might be really good ideas for the future. And I think it's important that we get some younger people in there.
I know a really good pipeline for younger people to come in, other than uh, my case, my mother, or other people in the community bringing you in, is there's an ANCW collegiate program. And so you can be in ANCW at the college level. And I think that's been expanding the past couple of years. I know it's been in Oklahoma for quite some time. But like this last year, I noticed that it was more than just Oklahoma college girls there. And so that's really exciting. Do you see a future and more people building onto the collegiate program?
I would love to see that. I think that, um, and this is, I talked about this at the last convention, but 38% of all owned, operated, or managed agricultural businesses are women. And I think that a strong group of women have been raised in this upcoming, I'm going to call it my upcoming generation, um, that are independent, that are fully capable, and that can drive the organization in a way that is highly successful. So I would love, love, love to see more collegiates involved. Their voices matter, their ideas matter. There may be a time where you say, well, what if we did it this way? But any ideas and any thoughts that they come forward with are imperative, I think, to the success and future of American National Cattlewomen.
Absolutely, for sure. I'm excited that more colleges are becoming more open to having ANCW collegiate clubs on campus. I know that's something that's been discussed at the college that I went to several times, and so I'm glad to see it kind of more up and coming. And I think that's where the future of ANCW lies, because it gets people interested at gets people interested when at an early level before they get involved in a lot of other organizations and get completely engulfed with life. You're have a little bit more time while you're in college to do that type of stuff.
But then all of us follow the collegiate beef advocates on Facebook, and see what they're doing. It is so impressive. And they can explain things in a way that other collegiates understand it. If they're unfamiliar with it, they can relate to them. The other thing I would love to see is certain classes brought back into the schools, where you learn to cook different meats, home ec,
Mm-hmm.
or even as a child growing up in my generation, we learned about where our food comes from. And the kids right now, a lot of them don't know unless you're in an ag-based area. Um, so I think that's imperative because they're not understanding that it doesn't just come from the cliche grocery store.
Mm-hmm. I personally think that consumer science in general needs to be something that's mandatory at either the college or better yet high school level, where they do get, because people don't know how to cook, they don't know how to experiment with different cuts of beef because they just don't know how to cook. They weren't taught by by previous generations. So it's such a lost art. um, but something that I always thought of, because we have ag classes that are FFA based, but that's not going to work for all high schools, and especially not for all students. And so having something tweaked a little bit differently so it's applicable for every student there. And so I always thought like an agriculture consumer science class where maybe they garden, but they, or something a little hands on is always ideal, but they learn how the food that is on the table gets to that table, and then like how to cook it and what to do with it. And because there's multiple disconnects along the chain of the farmer to the food on your plate, and almost everything along the way people aren't particularly aware of, and they haven't had to think about it because the food's just always there.
It would be neat to have like a gate to plate thing for different age groups, like for the younger grade school kids and then junior high through high school, for those that don't have the opportunity or their parents live and work in the city. That would be phenomenal to have something like that. We do gate to plates all over the country, and Arizona does them quite often with the Beef Council. But to do something like that for children, where it's just a short little something that holds their attention, and so they could better understand where food comes from, and then from 7th grade through high school, because a lot of these kids just don't get the opportunity, and their parents may not share with them where it really comes from.
If their parents
I don't
know.
know what the answer is there. Yeah, if their parents even know. So it's important, you look at it, and my generation is maybe 2 generations away from being on the farm. When I trace back my ancestry, well, my grandparents had a farm, and that's where I spent my summers. But a lot of people, you get away from that. And my kids grew up, with some sort of, most of the time, some sort of either equine or something, chickens or something.
Yeah, there's just more and more people that don't have a grandpa or a cousin or an uncle that farms, and so people just getting more and more disconnected. But yes, we call our programs Ag in the Classroom here in Nevada, that either they come out to a farm or the farmer comes to them. But I think we need to be more on top of doing more programs like that. And the unfortunate part is it takes a lot of volunteer work to put that type of stuff together, but hitting them at different age groups, so it actually soaks in, especially
Yeah.
if they're middle school and above, and they can really start to comprehend some of the things that we're telling them.
Yeah. And it'd have to be a little different for the younger children. And a lot of people get to go in and read, but it's not that, to them about agriculture, but it's not that way in every school. And so you have the inner city kids that have no information on that. And I think there should be something so that they understand it. I did a thing with the mayor of another town and some other people when I sat on the economic development committee for our community, and it's called the Copper Corridor, because we're copper rich. And so we went around to different communities, and each one of us, the mayor and of Superior and the economic development director, we'd all talk about something different. And mine was, grow something. Even if you only have a little patio, grow something to put on your plate. So that was another thing I did I thought it was pretty beneficial.
Yes, it is definitely a lot more rewarding than you think. Growing just even something small and going through that entire process, and getting the literal fruit of your labor. And it's definitely something that not a lot of people get to experience, but I think it's a very like surreal type of thing that you can do.
Well, and what we were able to do is identify different growers. And something that I didn't know is we had 2 gourmet mushroom growers within the Copper Corridor. And we had a young lady who had her own goats and was making her own goat's milk soap. So how do we properly market that within our Copper Corridor so that other people know about it and can have the benefit of purchasing from that person?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a lot more direct to consumer. There's definitely been a big, not like push, but a big lean that way, for a lot of people. And it takes a lot of work. It's a lot more resources. And if you're raising like beef animals, like I do, it takes a lot more time before you get that paycheck. And but you get more, you get to keep a lot more of that paycheck, which is the, if you can
Yes.
hold out for it. And so I think that that's really incredible. And we're seeing a real, I spend too much time on the internet, but on there, I see a real revival for people who want to buy direct from the farmer. And some of it, unfortunately, is because they think that the food at the grocery store is not ideal or safe for them to consume, which is not what we want either. But
No.
it is still good that people want to, it's a double-edged sword in a sense that people still want to support farmers. And I think that there's a big revival for that. I don't know if it's because of the side of the internet that I'm on, but when I see videos about ag and I post videos about ag, there's a lot of people that are very supportive. And so I have a lot of hope for the future because people are more interested in watching videos and following farmers on the internet into where their
I
food is
think,
coming from.
yeah, I think there's a lot of more mom and pop or a little more accelerated than that, people selling their beef. And I think that's great. And if you want to buy from them, great. But by no means does that mean that our commercial beef product in the store is unsafe. Um, you know, in many cases, it may grade higher. You know, it may grade higher. So um, just depends on how you raise your beef and what you do. But I don't want anybody to think that we should. I just bought hamburger. I have some in the freezer, but when I was at the store, the price was good. I bought some hamburger, made a shepherd's pie. So, you know, it's safe. I wouldn't eat it if it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Especially with our background, we know exactly how what that meat goes through, and we still trust it. And we still know that it's safe. It's very unfortunate. It made my blood boil when I saw this. Like it ticked me off. But I was in the death scroll, and on it, I can't remember if it was an ad or just a video, but there was a rancher, and I think I've seen his stuff before, or at least very similar stuff. But he was like, did you know that cattle in the United States supermarkets have mRNA vaccines? Not my cattle. You should buy directly from me. And it was just a load of junk. There is no such thing as mRNA vaccines in cattle in the entire world. But when COVID was going on, that's something that people started to get worried about. And so he was capitalizing on people's fear of the US beef industry. And it was so stupid. There's not very many of us at all. And his goal is to shoot everyone else in the foot because he wants to sell his product. And there's a lot of ways you can sell your product without shooting everyone else for it.
Disparaging everyone else. Yeah, I can remember, especially when COVID hit, how the labeling just seemed to go crazy. And I had somebody ask me something about antibiotics. I said, first of all, the antibiotics are out of their system pretty much in the same time they're out of human systems. And you want your ranchers to be able to doctor an animal if they need to be doctored, if they're not well, just like you want to feel better. And, you know, here, if John has to doctor an animal or give him an antibiotic, they get a second tag in their ear. So that if someone wants, you know, grass raised when we sell our yearlings, we can say the one with the additional tag was treated with antibiotic, and they can make that decision on their own. It's a bunch of malarkey, but you know, that's how people want it to roll. So that's fine too. It's just some of the things that, like you said, the MNRA, NCBA put out a little blurb about it. So anytime anybody asks me a question on Facebook or anything, I just forward them that. No. Here, you know, you can believe me or not believe me, but this is what, you know, the statement is on it. And
The
it was
statement
kind of
from horse's
silly.
mouth.
The one good thing, well, nothing really good came from COVID. But people bought more beef because they were home and they had the opportunity to experiment with recipes that they didn't have time for before. So I thought that was exciting as far as beef goes. So that was good, but everything else with that was.
I kind of enjoyed COVID because I was a junior in high school when it happened. And I didn't like going to high school. I only liked my ag classes. That's the only reason I wasn't homeschooled, essentially. So for me, it was great because I got to just stay on the ranch for the next year and a half and didn't have to go to school. And I learned a whole lot more being able to spend more time on the ranch in different seasons and periods that I usually wouldn't have been able to because I had to go to school all the time. So I did enjoy that part, that I got to stay on the ranch a whole lot more. So there are a few twinkling lights when it comes of positivity when it comes to COVID. It's definitely
Yeah.
changed a lot of things, and I think a lot of those things are a good thing. People started to realize I think that's kind of when the ball started rolling and people started looking into where their food came from, because all of a sudden it wasn't on the grocery store shelf. People started thanking farmers and thanking truckers and things like that. It was just kind of, it was an opportunity for everyone to get out of their busy corporate lives and to actually touch grass, as my generation says a lot, apparently. But it makes sense, like going out and touching grass and kind of slowing down to see how the world really works.
What I am impressed with is the amount of people that are doing research to find out what is healthy and what is not healthy. And I find that impressive that all of that is happening and what the falsehoods are and the false advertising. So that gives me some hope that there's going to be a more educated generation.
No, I've definitely seen a lot more people kind of move in that direction, that they're like throwing away plastic utensils and looking at what's in their laundry detergent and have you. And so I think that's a really good direction for people to go, that you should know what you're putting in your body and how it's going to affect you positively or negatively, and getting back into basic nutrition and stuff like that. And so I'm excited to see where that's all going to go. I do see it sometimes being bad because influencers, like they make money based on how many views and likes and yada 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 they get, right? That there are people that go through grocery stores and they go, "Did you know that your Fruit Loops are toxic?" And some of the stuff I'm talking about, maybe it's not great for you, but they do make videos of, "Did you know that the chicken in your grocery store and the beef in your grocery store is actually toxic because it was raised with antibiotics and hormones and a feedlot and blah 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 blah," like all the main talking points. So there are people that are capitalizing on people's worry, unfortunately. So hopefully that's a good opportunity for us to kind of to swoop in that niche to spread our word some more.
Well, and I've made some changes myself as far as when I look at labels. I'm reading labels a lot more often than I have in the past, but because I now have the time, I'm making a lot more from scratch here at home. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to do that. Been making a lot of sourdough, did a lot of herbal remedies for colds, coughs, things like that. And I'm lucky, someone told me just the other day that they believe that everything we need to cure ourselves, God put here on earth. And it's just identifying it, or maybe it hasn't been identified yet. And maybe some things there aren't cures for. I believe in conventional medicine. I do, I take it myself. But if I can curb something with an herbal remedy, I'm going to try it.
I mean, it's not going to hurt anything. And at the end of the day, if it's something you don't have to go to the doctor for and pay for, and because like things like antibiotics like destroy your gut if you take them on a regular basis. And so trying to prevent some, because everything has a effect. All medicine has a side effects to it, and so trying to prevent negative side effects as much as possible, I think, is a admirable goal.
Well, there's an herb that grows here on the ranch, and it's called yerba santa. And it's the most awful thing you ever drank in your life. Nikki Weston thought I was trying to kill her when I sent it to her. And I said, but did it work? And she said, yeah, it worked. But I didn't know if I was going to make it through my cup of tea. But it works. If I'm getting a cold and I drink that, it nixes it. And John grew up drinking that. We have Native American cowboys, and they drink it if they're getting sick, and it works. It really does work. So some of that stuff I'm a true believer in, what nature has provided us.
When
But
oh, go
read
ahead.
in scripture, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. Cattle are mentioned so many times in the Bible, and we're here to utilize them, to tend to them, to care for them, and utilize them.
I always thought it was interesting with all the references of being a good shepherd, and Jesus being the shepherd and us being his flock and everything, and how glorified and how high of a standard taking care of the sheep as the shepherd or as the cattle really is, and how high of regard that is taken in the biblical sense, and how incredible it is that I am playing that same role, taking care of God's animals, as the stories and the analogies that Jesus is making throughout the Bible. I always thought was very, very surreal and very humbling that we're in that same role.
It's a very honorable vocation. It's an honor roll, in my opinion. That's my opinion on it. But, the fact that cattle are mentioned even back then is, that speaks for itself, I think.
Yes, I think that when we look at history, whether it's biblical or not, biblical history is some of the oldest history we have. But whenever we look at history, society started because people started to domesticate animals and started to put seeds in the ground. That is the complete and total foundation of all of our lives. And that people have always eaten, I mean, it depends on some cultures, but broadly speaking, have eaten meat, have utilized all the animals, and that's how they thrived and progressed in their culture and progressed in the type of people that they were, is because they had that foundation of healthy, reliable meat for themselves, so they could go and do other great things.
It's nutritious rich, so I think somebody knew what they were doing.
Yes, especially when we talk about like everyone all over the world. I always thought was interesting when you talk to the vegan, vegetarian types. I got in some, I didn't start this, okay? Someone started getting in tips in a comment of a video I made, and the vegan guy, his vegan was in his profile name. like his username, was saying that most tribes, most ancient people actually just survived on plants. And most really didn't use meat at all. And so he was going tit for tat with some other guy. And I came up with a question. I didn't want to get in a fight because it's not worth it. But I just asked the question. I said, genuinely asking, what about the people who were like in the Great Plains where there were no fruit trees, there was just grass. I went to school in the Panhandle of Texas. There is just grass there. Or the people who are in the Arctic Circle, they don't have a, a variety of plants year round. Most places don't have a plethora of plants year round. And so I just genuinely asked that question. And we went back and forth like 2 or 3 times. And then he deleted his original comment because he just, I guess at the end of the day, didn't have an answer to that very basic, genuine question that I asked.
There's also the science of blood types. Have you ever looked into that?
Not too
Different
much.
blood types, like my blood type, and I've always noticed I do better with meat. I have to have meat every day. If I wanted to eat salad every day, I would probably get sick. But my blood type is a carnivore. There are some blood types that do better if they want to go, say, on a diet or fast and eat salads all week and nothing but that. They might fare a little better. I would not. So, but even those blood types have some sort of meat protein recommended in their diet. So I did a little research on that, and that was interesting to me because it was interesting to me because it said some of the things that I should not eat don't sit well with me. So, but that was just interesting to me. But every blood type needs some sort of protein, and meat is the most effective, efficient, and it tastes good. So
Yes, it's easily digestible and it has all the amino acids, which is something that plants can't really do.
yeah.
And so I got a new cat dog puppy and he's very friendly. um, I've not given him enough attention in the past hour. So, um, but yeah, beef is and just meat as a whole is so like at cellular base just one of the best things that we can eat, and people are starting to pick up on that a lot more in the past couple of years. I've noticed, so that's very interesting. I'm excited to see that trend continue to go move forward.
It's interesting as they start doing all these different studies, like I was saying, the blood type, that's been around for a little while. But as it's become more popular and people can look at those lists and go, you know what? It says I shouldn't be eating that, and that's never agreed with me. Or I need a more meat-based diet. But yeah, I've always been a beef eater.
I've never tried
Always.
not eating it. I've always, for as long as I can remember, been at least 2 meals, if not all of them, have an animal product of some sort in them. So I don't know what would happen if I tried otherwise, but I'm not going to, so we don't have to worry about that.
You don't have to worry about that one.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think our time is kind of coming to an end. If this is a good place to pause, unless you have anything else that you would like to bring forward.
I would just like to say that if anybody's attending an ANCW meeting, invite a friend. Maybe, a friend that maybe is not a member so they can see where we're about. We're growing. And I'd like to see it continue to grow. I think, as I said in the beginning, I think it's an elite organization. I think along with that, you gain lifetime friendships. There isn't any place that some of us can't call and there'd be an open door. And it's just the camaraderie of women. And when someone's down and out, you have hundreds of women praying for you and helping you out or checking on you. And it's very important, I think. Women have taken on so many roles that were traditionally for men that I think we need sometimes the strength of a woman, but also the gentleness and caring of a woman as well in our lives. And I would love to see more people bring a non-member and let them see what we're about.
For anyone who did FFA, that's kind of what I equivalent ANCW to, is the camaraderie of being in the sea of blue jackets. Like, you're surrounded by people who come from all sorts of different walks of life, but you have a common interest, a common passion, and a common love. And that people who are lifelong friends from every corner of the country. And so that my transition from FFA, from the chapter and state level to ANCW, was very, very comparable. And so it's definitely something.
The thing that I like about ANCW is we can all have different opinions. And Lord knows when we walk out that door, the challenges we have to face. And I can say that there is not one woman that if we walked out that door together, whether we agreed or disagreed, that wouldn't stand shoulder to shoulder with you to face whatever those challenges were. And that's fantastic. That's just not something you get anyplace else. We're one together and we're strong. And I think that's important. It's really important in this day and age, and especially with what we're all doing.
Very much.
And with more women taking on their own businesses in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
We need that strongness, but also the gentleness and the friendship. And this is the one place that is ideal for what we're doing, that you can get all that.
Mm-hmm.
One-stop shop.
Yeah, as far as I know, the first woman in ag organization out there, and it's continued to evolve and grow over the past 75 plus years. And so It's definitely a very unique place that I'm very thankful and blessed to be a part of. My grandmother was one of the founders of the first cowbells group in Nevada. She recruited my mom, her daughter-in-law, and now I'm here. So it's definitely something that can turn into a multi-generational affair.
That's important. That's important because then you retain the history and you also have the new, and the younger next generation can take it to another level.
Very much so.
And that's important. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for all your time and sitting down with us today. We greatly appreciate it. And we also greatly appreciate all of our listeners who held on in this roller coaster of a ride of the new podcast venture of ANCW. And we are excited to get more episodes and new episodes out to you guys. The first Friday of each month is the goal. And so thank you all for listening, and we hope to see you next time.